Seriously? Y'all haven't watched this movie yet? So here I am making a review of The Suicide Squad, a review that I wanted to make when the movie came out, but I decided not to for some reason. I'm not entirely sure what was going through my mind at that time, but I decided to not make a review and instead focus on other things, such as playing through a bad video game. But in this instance, I figured that since this movie is still out in theaters and still seems to not be doing as well as it should be doing, so I figured why not? Let's make a review of The Suicide Squad, about 2 weeks too late. To start off with, I think I should list a few negatives, since this movie is really good, and I'm sure that that's not a surprise at all to most of you. But, I don't know, I feel like mentioning some things to justify whatever score I decide to give it at the end. So I think one of my biggest complaints about this movie is that the directing, while being very good, isn't always the best style for this kind of movie. I'm going to try and explain this as best as I can. But to start off with, I'll just mention that the movie is around 2 hours long, which is a fine enough length for a film, but there are a lot of things going on in this movie. And I think that this is a little bit of a problem when you take in the fact that the movie has super fast pacing and almost never will it come to a stop and slowly try and reach to the audience. And when it does, it feels super abrupt. I would say that the pacing, when it is going super fast, is fine and natural, but I would prefer that when it is going super fast, if we were to go just a little bit slower, and then when it slows down completely, I think the pacing still needs to try and catch up with the rest of the movie, because it feels kind of off in many situations. There are some scenes that do this very well, especially scenes at the end of the movie, which I won't mention because I don't want to give away spoilers, but some of them are really cool, but a lot of them just kind of pop up out of nowhere, and I don't really think that they make a lot of sense. But that is pretty much my only big negative here. There's not a lot for me to poke fun at all. I would say that the pacing of the movie just isn't the best and probably could have been better. I also think that some of the characters should have been, I guess you could say, in the movie a little bit more. I feel this with Amanda Waller especially. I feel like this character should have been a more driving force in this movie. But yeah, that's pretty much my only negatives, so let's get into why you should watch this movie. To start off with, I think one of the biggest positives, for me at least, in this movie was that it does not take itself seriously at all. This is a completely wild and chaotic adventure, and it takes full advantage of that. There are a lot of scenes of complete destruction and violence that will be met with just incredibly strange music choices that, while strange, do fit the scene. There is also a giant CGI monster fight at the end, just like in every single DC movie, but here I find it to be justified, especially with the tone and chaos of the movie. And also, I just feel like all of the characters in this movie are really good. All of them are portrayed by really good actors who do the job very well. There are a lot of humorous scenes in this movie, and they are all great. This movie had me laughing a lot of the time, but when it went to an emotional moment, it was still just as effective. It doesn't really feel like a comedy movie, it just feels like a goofy superhero movie. And honestly, I think that that's perfect for the Suicide Squad. I mean, the movie is called The Suicide Squad, or at least that's what the group is called. That's a name that, in my opinion, you shouldn't take seriously at all, and it should have more fun with itself than other groups of superheroes, or in this case, supervillains. And I think that that's also portrayed to us very well. While we do know that every single one of our main characters here are technically supervillains, and we can see that in the movie, we don't really think of them as that. We just kind of think of every single one of them as anti-heroes. And honestly, once again, for the Suicide Squad, I think that this fits really well. And also, I will say that the movie is shot very well. There's not a lot of scenes in the trailer that I can show you that I guess show how well shot the movie is, but it's there, and it's just so good. I think another thing that I really like is the lighting. The lighting is always completely on point. You can see everything that happens, and some of the color choices are done very well. And also, while I did complain a little bit about the crazy plot structure earlier, the complete chaos of it all honestly makes me like the movie even more. And while I've only seen it once, and I'm unsure whether or not I'm going to see it again, I mean, I feel like I'd be more than willing to, I still do think that this is a fun and entertaining movie that can be enjoyed by almost anyone. Another thing I should mention is that this movie is rated R. It should be rated R, and it makes sure that it's rated R. Like I said, this movie is very violent. The humor can be pretty adult rated sometimes, and I think obviously this isn't a bad thing, but I do think that it's worth mentioning if you are thinking about seeing this movie. But yeah, that's mainly all that I have to say about the Suicide Squad, and I can kind of see why I was putting this video off now. I mean, I just didn't really feel like there was a lot to talk about. This movie is just really good and worth watching. Though I will say that there are some DC fans who are going a bit too crazy about it. DC hasn't had a good movie in a really long time, so I think that them finally getting a good movie is just making them way over enthusiastic about it. I wouldn't say that it's the best superhero movie of the 21st century, but I will say that it is a very good movie. So I am going to give The Suicide Squad a very nice 8 out of 10.